Joining us now is constitutional law professor Josh Blackman. Professor, much as I do not want to go back to con law class, I think we have to. So, and you're the perfect person for me to ask. All right. So there are certain rights mentioned in the Constitution, but honestly, not that many. So if it's not mentioned in the Constitution, can it still be a constitutional or fundamental right?
Well, thanks for having me, Trey. What the Supreme Court said in the Dobbs case is that if a right is not written down in the Constitution, the courts will only protect it if it's deeply rooted in history and tradition. That is, this right is so old, so ancient, that it doesn't have to be written down, that it's simply understood. This is an affirmative rejection of how Roe v. Wade operated, which said, well, even if there was no right to abortion in the 1800s, we don't care. We think there should be one now. And that's a huge shift in how the court's approaching constitutional liberty.
All right, so does that mean that the right to privacy, because that word is not mentioned in the Constitution, but Griswold gave us that right. Same-sex marriage, obviously not mentioned. Marriage at all is not mentioned in the Constitution. So how do we determine what is firmly rooted in our history and tradition and what is not?
Well, you mentioned marriage. Put aside gay marriage for a moment. The idea of people getting married is old, really old, older than civilization. And I think even Justice Thomas or Justice Scalia would admit that there's a fundamental right of marriage. But same-sex marriage is different. It's only been in existence for about 2 decades or so around the world. And so that's a right that's not deeply rooted. And no matter what you think, abortion, at the time of the framing of the 14th Amendment in 1868, was illegal in a majority of states. This was not a right that has deep historical roots.
All right. So if look, I wish you had taught me con law. I would have understood it better. So if I hear you right, I mean, we have certain rights mentioned with particularity, and then there are other rights that are kind of firmly rooted in our history and tradition. And if it's not one of those two, it's what? Not a constitutional right, not a fundamental right, and up to state legislators and therefore the people to identify it as a right?
Exactly. If a right's not listed in the Constitution and it lacks these historical roots, then it's up to the people to decide. You know, you said at the top of your program, who decides? The people can decide whether there's a right to abortion, and that's what happens with Dobbs. Dobbs restored the abortion question to the political process, where really it should have been all along for the past half-century.
All right. I want to ask you a question that has vexed me. The word abortion, marriage, those words are not mentioned in the Constitution, but there is a word that's mentioned twice, I think, and that is the word life. So if life is mentioned in the Constitution twice, can you really have 50 different state definitions on when it begins or when it ends?
Well, there's an argument that the 14th Amendment requires states to protect life. That is, they must protect fetuses equally as they protect living people. You should know that none of the justices signed on to that position, but it's one that has a lot of support in certain faith groups.
Well, I am not surprised that non-smart lawyers do not agree with me, but I really am trying to figure out. I mean, of all the words that are not mentioned, that one is. I think it's in the 5th and 14th Amendments, but you would know better than I. So what is the argument against define? I mean, are we really going to have 50 different definitions on when it begins? Because if we have that, can we also have 50 different definitions on when it ends?
Well, here's a big question, right? In Dobbs, the justices said the Constitution is neutral on abortion. This is what Scalia said many years ago. It doesn't require abortion, doesn't ban abortions. It's agnostic. It's neutral on it. But there's a group of scholars who today argue that no, the 14th Amendment requires states to preserve the life of people, and it requires equal protection of the law between living people and living fetuses alike. The current court, I don't think, has much appetite for that argument, but it does exist. And I think what we'll see is states actually adopt what's called fetal personhood, that you have this right of personhood, this right of life from the moment of conception. And I think we'll see some states move forward with this conception, and they can do that precisely because Dobbs overruled Roe. We're really in a brave new world where the arguments you're advancing, Trey, can get the light of day and even be considered because 5 lawyers in Washington can no longer tell them what to do.
5 lawyers. Who would have thought? Alexander Hamilton would be shocked. He was worried that the judicial branch would be too weak, but it is not. Professor, thank you for joining us again on a Sunday night. I can't wait to talk to you again.
Thank you, Trey.